In a moment, I'll introduce you to Stephen Parker. Stephen asked me to interview him, which I was surprised about as he's a very private person. This is an exceptional opportunity. Hello, Stephen. It's lovely
Hey,
to
Anne,
see
you
you.
okay? It's lovely to be here, actually. It's nice being in the treatment room.
We just wanted to go over sort of your life, really.
Right, okay.
And we'll start right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So where were you born?
Yeah, for those people who don't know, I was born in Bolton, which is Lancashire. And I was born on the 15th of March, 1970.
And what was Bolton like in the 1970s?
Again, obviously, it's quite nice, like growing up there, especially if you like history like myself, because like we lived, certainly in the early years, used to live at 128 Tonmore Road in Bolton. And it was a typical two-bed terraced, even though the rooms were quite big. Well, you had lots of cobble streets. You had a railway viaduct across the valley, which was still open. You had the cotton mills. My mum, which I'll talk about later, used to work at Dartmill, and it was a fascinating place. And I won't spoil it too much, but me, my brother, and my mate Chris, we kind of made rafts and we sailed down the river, avoiding the weir. We kind of jumped off just before the weir and paddled aboard.
So which river was that?
The River Tong at
right.
Tonmore.
Okay.
Like you said, it was a predominantly industrial area. It was a poor area, but everyone was really nice. It was like salt of earth. And certainly in the early days, you could leave your front door open and no one would come in and rob you. I'm not saying that's still the case to this day, but back then, you still had neighbours, you still had that element of community, which were really nice. And the fact that I made friends, which is always a good thing, isn't it, really?
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your family.
Yeah, obviously, my mum we call Rosemary Parker. Originally, before she got married, she was a Hall. Absolutely lovely lady, you know what I mean? And I think characteristic-wise, I'm quite similar. She'd literally do anything for anyone, you know what I mean? Lovely lady. Even if she were busy, she'd stop what she was doing, she'd make time to listen to you, and she would try and help. And if she couldn't help, she'd get someone who could, you know what I mean? Really genuine, down-to-earth, lovely lady, obviously working class. And I think I'm probably more like my mum than my dad, you know what I mean? Because I'm kind of soft, you know what I mean? I know you don't see me, but like sometimes you do cry, don't you? You know what I mean? And like I said, my dad, obviously I love my mum and dad to bits. My dad was tall like myself, a really fit gentleman, very strong, you know what I mean? He's like, he used to be into like weights and stuff, and he's one of these, you could like literally get onto the floor and do about 100 press-ups without stopping. And I don't mean like the rubbish ones, proper press-ups, you know what I mean? He'd just get up like he'd fingered and like really, lovely guy, a little bit quiet. And maybe opposites attract, because my mum was quite outgoing and quite lively, where my dad were a little bit quiet. So much so, if we kind of went into Bolton Town Centre, my mum would go in with like me and my brother, and my dad always stood outside.
Right.
He didn't like going in clothes shops or out like that. But he was a lovely gentleman, and he worked really hard. I do miss him, I really do.
And they've got an unusual story, your mum and dad, haven't they, of how they met, etc.
Well, that's it. Again, obviously before my time, because I didn't come till later on. But back then, you could get like a £10 ticket to Australia. I'm sure a few people might remember this. But my dad was all set up. He was literally, he was ready to the following week. He would have got a ferry or whatever it were, and he would have gone to Australia and started a new life. Well, I believe himself and his mates decided to go to Blackpool as like a celebration before he left. And I know, because I found like all certificates from my dad, so he used to be quite a good ballroom dancer. And on this occasion, I believe he'd gone into the Blackpool Tower,
Right.
the Embassy Ballroom,
Yeah.
and he met my mum, which is kind of really nice. But you can imagine this is the last weekend before he emigrates and starts a new life. Well, they must have got on, because my dad never left this country. He obviously changed his plans quite quickly. And he stopped and eventually got married to my mum, and then me and my brother came along.
So you've got a brother as well?
Yeah, I've got a brother. He's older than me, David James Parker. My middle name's John, Stephen John Parker, and my brother were David James. And he's well, he was born in 1968, October the 22nd, so he's slightly older than me. And like you say, we get on. We do get on. And a few things we might touch on later.
Yeah.
But now, we still see him occasionally, you know what I mean? I know, like, he still lives over at Darsley in Bolton, and I'm over in Wakefield with Anne, so...
So, tell me a bit about school. Did you enjoy school?
Again, obviously, at a very early age, we moved to Tongmoor, which I mentioned was like quite an industrial district of Bolton. And I used to come out my back door and then walk up the back street. And at the side of the old, I believe it was St Augustine's Sunday School, there was a ginnel. And what we used to do, we used to go up that ginnel, past the garage, which one left, past the school playing fields, and we used to come out. And basically, my first primary school was Tongmoor County Primary. And I'll always remember it because right opposite the entrance to the school gates, there was a bit of a car park, but there was old derelict vicarage.
Right.
And I believe at one time, because St Augustine's Church on Vickerford Road was behind that, but I always remember this old building, a beautiful building, but it was absolutely derelict, you know, and there was rumours about it being haunted and all this sort of stuff. You know, I suppose like as a young, impressionable child, you know, like when you used to walk up there, you kind of like look at it. Well, certainly, you know, like on days off, me, my brother and my mate Chris Jones, we used to go exploring. And this particular building, it was insecure. And there was like a downstairs door. And we one day we got up the courage, as you do, you know, when you're young and you're maybe a bit braver than you are now. And when we kind of peeped in the door, and I always remember it, literally all the floorboards had collapsed. You had kind of a staircase which was fastened to the wall and it was going up. And then when you looked up, there was this like attic room, or the remains of an attic room with a window, which obviously looked out over the school. And it was absolutely fascinating, but obviously, you know, this thing about being haunted, which I suppose I was sceptical, but I do remember one day walking home from school and I happened to glance at the window in the upper part of the building, and I'm not exaggerating, you know, like I did see a face. And, you know, it's like someone was like looking out. I don't know if it was a spirit of an old vicar, whatever, but there was a face in the window, and it was kind of an impossibility because there's no staircase inside. So I do believe I saw a spirit in that building. And I remember I looked at it and it kind of looked at me. And then I thought, oh, I won't swear, but I suddenly legged it down the gill and went home, you know what I mean? But a little bit more about Tongmoor County Primary, obviously my first school, and I really enjoyed it. And I was kind of lucky because like when I started that school, my mum was a dinner lady there. So I used to kind of see her throughout the day, and like, obviously at dinner time when she was serving the meals and stuff, you know, it was really nice. And there was like an outdoor classroom, you know, like you had the main school building, and then you're like a playing field. Well, kind of in between that, you had like this corrugated, detached classroom. I used to go in there for classes, and I used to really enjoy it because obviously not only did you have views over the fields, but there used to be some really good teachers back then, you know what I mean? And it did make a big impression on me. And I always remember on this particular occasion, it was like the teacher wanted you to do a poem, but it had to be about something that you were interested in. And even from a very early age, you had this genuine interest in the countryside, nature, wildlife, history. So I decided to write a poem about the countryside. And bearing in mind, you know, like I would have only been about 7 when you start primary school.
Okay.
Yeah, that I came up with this, and I'm going to tell you what it is. And it's called The Countryside. The countryside, so green and fresh. The air, so clean and cool. The mountain streams go flowing on. They twist and turn on rocky ground and depart once more to reservoir. The farmer walking with his dog in the distance disappears. The sun is gone. The wind is here. Another day slips slowly by. And I remember I said it, and everything went quiet in the room. The kids stopped talking. Everyone was staring at me. I looked at the teacher. Her jaw had dropped to the floor. And it was at that moment I thought, I've got something here. You know what I mean? Because I'd never really, you know, I was kind of quiet, quite shy when I was younger. And I came up with that, and to be honest, I didn't really spend that long on it, and it just kind of like flowed out of me. And I remember thinking, you know, like, I'm not saying being different, but I had a genuine interest in poetry and English and words. But ironically, just as the teacher was about to speak, the alarm went, and then all the kids rushed out. And I always remember, I kind of never forgot it. But bearing in mind, I'm now 56, and I was coming up with that sort of poem back then at such an early age. You know, like, I must have had something.
Definitely.
You know, and the fact that I still love poetry to this day, and later on, which I'll talk about, my poems became lyrics and I joined the band. But we can talk about that a bit later.
Okay. So after the primary school, you went on to high school. Did you take the 11 plus?
Yeah, obviously at the age of 11. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you get to 11, you finish primary school, you got a bit of a summer, and then you start at secondary school. Well, I remember, and you know, I'll touch on a few things here. My brother, I'll be honest, like my brother academically, he was very clever. Yeah, and maybe I wasn't as clever, you know what I mean? Or certainly what it was. And no detriment to my brother. It's just like looking back upon it, my brother set an entrance exam for Dean Grammar School, which was the other side of Bolton, but back then it was a really good school. It was a grammar school. So obviously you can imagine my mum and dad, certainly my dad were really proud that a Parker were going to a grammar school. You know what I mean? He passed the entrance exam, he got in. And I always remember he had a really fancy blazer, really smart and everything. But, and this is what not a lot of people know, and I don't know if his mum realised at the time, but I got sent to what was the worst school in Bolton. And at the time it was Castle Hill High School at Tom Moore. I'd had a notoriously bad reputation. So you can imagine, it's almost like I felt a little bit let down. And I'm not saying all went on my brother, because that's not fair. But I remember not feeling cheated, just that, okay, I'll go to Castle Hill. And I always remember going there, because even back then I was quite tall, you know, and as soon as you get there, the rumours, which were true, and it didn't happen to me, thank God, but some of the pupils who were there used to get the young people and put the head down the toilet and flush the chain.
Oh,
and it was that type of place. Also, I used to know this guy called Barry Robinson, and no detriment, but he was a dwarf. He used to be okay, you know, a nice guy, but I always remember on one occasion, these lads put him on top of a high wall and left him there.
Oh, no.
And he couldn't get down, and I had to go and get help to get him lifted down. But you can imagine being tall, yeah, people wanted to fight. Because I was tall, they thought I wanted to fight, and that wasn't the case. But if someone did start kicking off with me, I'll be honest, I suppose in this respect I was strong like my dad. You know, if someone started on me, I finished it. I didn't pick on me again, you know what I mean? It's not that I went out my way to fight, I didn't. But, you know, if you hit me in the face, I'm going to clobber you. And that's what I did. And sometimes, you know, like, I'm not saying teachers had dragged me off, but I suppose I would have made a good boxer back then. You know, I don't know what Tyson Fury would think about it, but I really was strong. And I think I got that from my dad. You know, determination. You knocked me on the floor, even at an early age. I'd get up, I'd dust myself down, and I'd come at you even harder. A bit like the Rocky thing, really. And I think it's still got to this day, you know what I mean? The fact that, I suppose more so now, which I'll talk about briefly, I'm like a dog with a bone. You know what I mean? If I believe in something, you know, I won't let go. You know, I'll keep going. And I'm still doing that to this day, trying to save canals. So that kind of, I suppose, answers that, doesn't it?
So you were at Castle Hill, and then Castle Hill closed down, didn't it?
Yeah, and it's a shame, really, because even though, obviously, we're school in Bolton, you know, when I got there, to be fair, a lot of the teachers were really good.
Right.
You know, and I started excelling in English. I was starting doing really well. You know, I love me English. You know, I love poetry. I loved all that. I love music. And another instance, like I said, I was in this music class, and it was kind of like where everyone, like, you know, you could play an instrument, you could do whatever, like, you know, like a communal experience type of thing.
Yeah.
And I always remember, you know what I mean, I couldn't really play an instrument. So anyway, like, I started to sing, you know, and you know, I really enjoyed it. You know, like, I suppose when you're young, before you know, your voice changes,
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I had an angelic voice, but people seem to like it so much. So after the class, you know, like when people were going, the teacher came over and he actually congratulated me, not only about my vocal ability, but by some of the lyrics we're coming up with.
Right.
It was like I was literally making songs up on the spot without trying. So that gift has kind of always been with me, being creative and coming up with, I suppose, like really unique and I'm not saying wonderful, but certainly melodies and lyrics. That was my forte. And like I said, I did carry that on later on with a music band. So.
Okay, lovely. So which school did you go after Castle Hill then?
Yeah, and this is the sad thing about it. You can imagine, you know, like you get to your third year doing really well, excelling, really good school reports. And what happened? They decided to close the school down.
Right.
So what happened were, obviously, you know, we got told that school closed down. And basically all the pupils at Castle Hill got transferred to Sharples High School, which back then was, I'm not saying it was posh, but it was a damn sight posher than Castle Hill. In terms of the houses nearby, big houses, lots of money. And it was difficult for me because, you know, obviously my mum and dad weren't rich, they were working class. I used to have like school vouchers, packed lunches, and no detriment to the kids, because kids can be quite cruel. But, you know, they used to like call us, you know, like the clothes we were wearing, they had like all designer stuff.
Yeah.
And I was in kind of, I'm not saying he had hand-me-down clothes or anything like that, but let's just say, in terms of my feet, you know, I've got big feet, I'll be honest, but I've got broad feet, and some of the shoes were a little bit tight for me.
Right.
So anyway, I started at Sharples, and then it was almost immediately, you know what I mean, because of all this stuff what were going on, you know, like I think I dropped a set in English just purely because of the people, you know, the kids.
Yeah.
You know, which were dead sad. Eventually, obviously, you've no choice to get used to it. One thing I did enjoy, ironically, was as options. One of my options was motor vehicle engineering.
Right.
And Mr. White, really nice, genuine guy. You know what I mean? Like, and I always remember once he wanted to do a kit car, but to do a kit car, you needed like an old car. So what he did, he went to a local scrapyard and rescued an old Triumph Herald saloon. Because on the old Triumph Heralds were a separate chassis, you know, and I always remember because he got it dropped off in the school car park at front of the school, and he kind of, as a joke, he put signs on for sale and all this, and everyone used to look at this car like, what the hell is that, you know what I mean? And eventually he got kind of pushed up to where we were doing the classes. All the body got removed, right down to a chassis, and then the metalwork teacher repaired the chassis, and eventually, it was kind of after I left, but they did eventually build this kit car.
Okay.
And I think it was called the Burlington Hour kit car. But back then, obviously, like me, Chris Jones, my friend who lived a few streets away, we both had that interest in motor vehicle. And even at that sort of age, 13, would you believe, between us, we kind of put our money together and we bought a Ford Capri.
Oh, wow.
Ford Capri 1600 GT in maroon. And I suppose that car now would be worth an absolute fortune. But we bought it to practice on. But about this time, they got an old Mini. You know, like Mr. White had found this old Mini with like one of the early ones with sliding windows. And let's just say that we really liked that Mini, so we did a swap. So we had the Mini, yeah, and they ended up with our Ford Capri. And I always remember, like, got the Mini home, and don't ask me why, because it was kind of like in red oxide. But we had this great idea to paint it in gold amorite, which, what we were thinking, you know what I mean? But anyway, so yeah, you know, like Sharples, it was the first time I'd ever been abroad. There was a school trip to Austria, of all places, which I really enjoyed. You know, so there were myself, Jonathan Vernon, and a guy called David Bleakley. And it was about this time, like obviously I've been into music for quite a while at that age. And it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I used to like the Sex Pistols.
Oh, yeah.
I used to like punk rock, and I kind of made claim to fame where I knew every word of every Sex Pistols song, and I could literally rhyme it. I won't do it now because I've not enough time, you know what I mean? But from that, I started friends with a guy called Brian Judge. He lived at Olive Wood, and then we started like meeting up. Brian liked my lyrics, and he had a guitar, and then we ended up forming this band called Pre-Judge JJ Black. And obviously after Brian Judge. And it was great. Used to meet up, practice, brother came involved, I saved up, bought a bass guitar, saved up again, got this keyboard and everything. And we were doing all right, to be fair. And I've still got a tape somewhere, a cassette tape of the early practices, you know what I mean? But what happens is, finally you leave school at 16. And, you know, at this point, I'd moved to Little Lever, because I moved to Little Lever in 1985.
Okay.
So you kind of lose touch. And I always think about that time, you know what I mean? Because Brian, he had literally buckets and buckets of buckets just full of lyrics.
Right.
And he was a really good lyricist.
Right.
And he was into like New Order, Blue Mondays and The Clash and all that. So yeah, it was, you know, like, I kind of wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed at Castle Hill, because I was excelling, I was doing really well. But I suppose if he hadn't gone to Sharples, I probably wouldn't have done motor vehicle engineering.
Yeah.
And that's where I found the love of the Morris Minor, which is still my favourite car of all time,
So
especially the Traveller.
we've got lots to talk about.
Yeah.
But, so you moved to Little Lever, didn't you?
Yeah, in 1985. Again, what happened was, obviously, we were still living at Tonmore Road, but my Auntie Barbara and Uncle Roy lived in Little Lever, and we used to visit them, drive over. And I always remember, because we used to go down like Bolton-Bury Road, we'd turn off, we're going into Bradley Fold, and we used to cross back then. There was the old level crossing gates. It was the derelict Bolton and Bury Railway. But even though the tracks had been lifted, the level crossing gates were still there, and that fascinated me in itself. And I can talk about that later on, you know, because I'm still interested in railways. But yeah, I used to go. So what happened was, my auntie kind of, I'm not saying persuaded, because my mum, I think she wanted a break. She wanted to go somewhere quiet instead of living, because we did live on a busy main road and there weren't much of a garden. So eventually that's what happened is, mum and dad bought a house, which was 17 Catterick Drive in Little Lever on the racecourse estate. And I was lucky, really, because one of the teachers from Sharples School lived at the top of the street.
Right.
And he used to take me to school.
Oh, that's really
Because
nice.
it was 2 buses otherwise to get there. You know what I mean? So yeah, I moved to Little Lever. And it was, honestly, it was like a breath of fresh air. Bungalows. I'd never lived in a bungalow before, you know what I mean? You had a drive, you had a garage. You can imagine me interested in cars and driving a garage. I was in my element.
So what else is at Little Lever?
Well, you know, like people who know me, obviously, this is the thing about it, you can imagine. But I must mention, yeah, that was 1985. Well, it would have been 1984, the year before, that my love of the countryside and walking, I joined Bolton Group of the Ramblers Association. And what used to happen, it used to meet up on a Sunday outside the old Nevada on Spar Road, which got burned down. But anyway, used to meet up there, jump on this coach. We used to go somewhere. The coach would drop us off. We'd have this walk, you know, like halfway, we'd have a cup of tea and all that. And then we'd come home. So what I'm getting at is, obviously I was interested in walking. You know, on one of the rambles, I walked along the top of the Shropshire Union Canal.
Right.
The Shropshire Way, I believe, there was that. But more so about Little Lever, that would have been probably early 85. Guy called Mr. Holden. What it was is, the Crawlerwell Valley Warden Service were having like a footpath discovery walk,
Okay.
you know, around Crompton Lodges and looking at like Knob End and all that, which is a place in Little Lever.
Yeah.
And me being interested in countryside and walks, like, I went on it. And anyway, like, you know, you're going along this riverside path, you know, really nice, loads of history, you know what I mean? And then you get to this clearing. And then there's the canal basin, Manchester Bolton-Bury Canal. You know, this lovely big canal basin, the aqueduct, you know, the derelict locks. So what happened then is, obviously, you can imagine, when we finally did move to Little Lever, you know, first thing I wanted to do is go and exploring.
Yes.
And I used to have like a 3-speed roadster, cow on handlebars, 3-speed. And what I did, I believe I got it from like an old charity shop, but I got hold of an old Manchester A to Z street atlas. And what was special about that, about the old editions, it showed the route, the line of the old canal, even where it had been filled and built over. So what I used to do, I used to go out, and sometimes I walked, sometimes I cycled. You can imagine with cobbles on the canal towpath. When I got back, I had a bit of a sore bum, you know what I mean? It was like, and all that. But yeah, started exploring it, started going to libraries, speaking to people who, like the guy, you know, like used to work at Lady Short Colliery. And, you know, that's kind of where that started. So from 1985, I was absolutely fascinated in Manchester Bolton-Bury Canal. You know, like, I went into Rock Hall, and I actually said to him, like, I'm interested in joining the Canal Society. And he says, what Canal Society? There is none. So even back then, you know what I mean, I was writing letters to politicians, I was doing letters to magazines. So 2 years before, I founded the Manchester Bolton Beard Canal Society in July 1987 at the tender age of 17. You know, I was writing letters, what said Manchester Bolton Beard Canal Society. Well, back then, it was pretty much me. But what I'm trying to say is that I was sending letters with Manchester Bolton Beard Canal Society 2 years before the formation.
Okay.
So that was kind of that, you know what I mean? And I suppose I'm still interested in that subject to this day, aren't I?
Yeah. So, when the Canal Society was formed, your mum and dad were kind enough to allow the meeting to be at your house, weren't they?
Yeah, that's correct. Because obviously, what happened, like I said, I wrote a letter to the letters page of Bolton Evening News talking about that I was interested and, you know, I wanted to form a society. And then various people contacted me, you know, like Sir Kevin Charnock. John and Margaret discovered me from going into Rock Hall. You know, they gave my details.
So we're talking about John and Margaret Fletcher.
Yeah. So what happened was we arranged this meeting where everyone had come to my mum's house, my dad's house, 17 Catterick Drive. And then John would then do like a slideshow. And it was at that meeting we decided to form a Canal Society.
Okay.
And like people there would take on various roles. In some instances, it might just be an interim until someone else come along.
Yeah.
But yes, so at my mum and dad's house is where the Manchester Bolton Beard Canal Society officially, with an interim committee, was formed.
Okay. So how did that meeting go? What did it entail?
Well, it was an interesting meeting, obviously, because you're like, obviously John and Margaret back then were really enthusiastic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not only that, but like they'd, unknown to me, been walking along the canal taking photographs. So when they gave that slideshow, you know, like it was fascinating for me as well. You know what I mean? It's probably the first slideshow I've been were talking about that particular canal.
Yeah.
So it went well, you know what I mean? And if I remember rightly, George Lee was the original chairman. Because at that point, John and Margaret, even though they did show an interest wanting to come on the committee, they were already involved with the Inland Waterways Association, the Manchester branch, etc.
Right, okay.
So it was only later on that they did they were on the interim committee, but it's only later on they did take formal roles where Margaret Fletcher took over from George Lee and became the chairman of the Canal Society.
Okay.
And her husband, John Fletcher, became the secretary. So it kind of evolved as when things went on, and then we ended up having, initially, obviously we had a couple of meetings at my mum's house, then we went to other people's houses, but eventually we booked the room in Rock Hall, which was still open back then, Rock Hall Visitor Centre, Moses Gate Country Park, and we started having committee meetings there.
Yeah.
So it did, and from that point, I know we're limited by time, but you know, it was nice because obviously I was genuinely passionate about the canal.
Yeah.
And what I've not mentioned, obviously, it was a derelict canal, 15 miles, 1 furlong on length. Last regular traffic, Bury in 1966, and literally it had been derelict for many, many years. And obviously it burst in 1936. So it was almost like from decline, it was the first time that anyone even contemplated trying to save it and bring it back to some sort of use.
Okay.
So it was interesting. It was an interesting time.
Yeah. So, we've got lots to talk about, but we are running out of time.
Yeah.
And we will be on again. Do you fancy meeting up again for another?
Yeah, most definitely, because
interview?
because just obviously Manchester Bolton Beard Canal Society, I could probably fill half an hour just talking about that. Maybe I could do like 8 hours talking about that. You know what I mean? Because I won't talk about it now because it'll spoil it. But let's just say, over the years, things did change, relationships did break down, but that's for next time.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. It's been really fascinating and I've learned lots.
No, thank you. Thanks for listening. You know, I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Because God forbid anything ever happened to me, then all this knowledge is lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously I'll be writing and all that sort of stuff. But I think this is first time, like I say, I'm a private person and I always have been, but I don't think people realise I'm actually kind of a gentle giant. I'm quiet, I'm quite loving, you know what I mean? I care. I'll do anything, like my mum, I'd do anything for anyone, you know what I mean? And sometimes I do wonder if people actually know me. You know what I mean? Or I'm not saying some people might be jealous of you, but what it is me is a genuine enthusiasm, a love for that subject matter. And I've always had that, and it's never gone away.
Yeah.
So maybe I should leave it there, shouldn't I?
Okay, well, as I say, it's been lovely to speak to you, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Yeah, most definitely. And thank you for listening, and thanks for asking the questions, I should say.
Okay, well, bye for now.
Bye, bye, thank you.